So in the meantime, my name is Grant Cates. I'm from the Aerospace Corporation. I have two co-authors, and they actually did the bulk of the work. I'm just the one that got the fortune to be able to travel this week. So my compliments to Karen Jones from our Center for Space Policy and Strategy. She did quite a bit of the work on this paper. And then also Jane from MIT did a tremendous amount of work as well. And they've got some original figures in the picture that I found to be incredibly helpful to this conversation about the green circular space systems. And really what we're talking about are environmental life cycle assessments for the satellite community. So with that, just some of the key points that we want to make is the global space economy is expanding at a tremendous rate. And the number of satellites that are being put in orbit, the number of launches that are occurring is just increasing at an incredible rate. And at the same time, we are in an environment where the global weather, warming, whatever you want to call it, is changing, and companies and nations are starting to pay attention. The question is, and additionally, there's social and investor pressures on making sure that companies are doing their part to make sure we're not damaging the environment. At the same time, we recognize that, yeah, the global space economy is increasing, the number of launches is increasing, the number of satellites in orbit is increasing, but is that really that damaging to the environment when we look at the number of, say, aircraft that are flying on a daily basis, approximately 1 million or more every day. And we're still not at the point of launching essentially more than one rocket a day, if that. But I look at it as it probably does influence the environment in some way, and we need to start doing environmental life cycle assessments to see what it really is. So this figure, which I really enjoyed, the fact that it shows the space environment actually influences the environment, or the space economy impacts the environment from the ground all the way up through the atmosphere and into space, above and below what they call the Kármán line, of course. And usually environmental assessments are done at a local level. But as soon as you launch something, you're global in terms of your impact. On the right side, there are a listing of the various regulatory and policy things from the space, well, let me start at the bottom with NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Agency Act, which is local, and then we have like the Space Treaty up at the top that's trying to govern at a global level what nations are doing in space. There's a lot of gaps today in how we really go about setting up environmental life cycle assessments in this type of environment, because again, it's global. So now we have all the nations. It's competitive, and there's just a lot that we still don't know about how we're affecting the environment. So one of the areas that we do know is that we have re-entering upper stages, and we have re-entering satellites. And we know that this is going to increase over time. We don't know exactly how much increase we're going to get. What I'm showing you here are two theorized projections, an optimistic one that is based upon if all the players that are proposing to the FCC and other regulatory bodies with these global mega constellations that's the number of re-entering upper stages that we could see by 2033, 500 per year. And projecting out to 2040, we could be seeing upwards of 14,000 satellites coming back from LEO. This does not include all the CubeSats. These are satellites that would be similar in nature to what SpaceX and OneWeb and Kuiper will be launching in the future. Now, the lower line is, well, what if the LEO economy really doesn't pan out and it's just the number of satellites essentially at a straight level, what we're putting up there today and what's ultimately going to come back. So you can see there's quite a bit less growth. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. We just don't know where it is. Now, what we don't know is what are the impacts, what are the environmental impacts of these individual satellites and rocket bodies as they come back. This chart here shows you the life cycle of a satellite. From the left, the launch of the satellite, or actually the launch of the rocket. So this is the launch of the rocket and its life cycle. This is the satellite that rides along with it. And this is a potential in the future we might have for servicing of that satellite. And there's, of course, the operations, and then servicing, recommissioning, or intentional decommissioning, where we would have atmospheric reentry for low Earth orbit versus a graveyard in outer space. And then ultimately, does it end up in the land or ocean abandonment, or did it demise in the orbit and cause some kind of issue? And then, of course, there's also the raw materials that are feeding all this. So this gives you an idea of the scope of the magnitude of what it would take to do an environmental life cycle assessment for our space economy. And then finally, our recommendations. One is we need to fund more research in terms of what is happening with re-entering rocket bodies and satellites that are coming back as they demise. What influence does that really have? We really don't know at this point. And then establishing a center of excellence for ensuring analytical rigor for these types of environmental assessments, and then harmonizing those so that they could be adopted internationally. So with that, I'll take questions in the time remaining if we have any, and thank you. Great, thanks. Oh, question up there?
When you consider your data, your numbers, did you consider the new 5-year lifetime requirement in LEO or the original 25-year of the existing satellites that are up there?
Right. So based upon the FCC filings, most like Starlink intends to come down within a year, and for Kuiper and OneWeb's a little higher, but I nonetheless assumed that they would actively come down to a low enough altitude where nature would take over, and they would ultimately come down within approximately a year. Now, we did get some pushback on that it may be a little bit longer than that. Essentially, we assumed a deployment phase of launches, and then the advertised lifetime of those satellites, which in the case of Starlink would be like 5 years. In the case of others, it would be 7 or 10 years, and then added an additional year to try to determine when they would ultimately come back. And then also they have to be, relaunched as they come back. Then there'll be more launches, and that's why you noted on the graph it ramped up rather slowly and it didn't really peak until like 2040, because we're just now at the beginning of deploying all these mega constellations. Yes, sir.
Grant, how does this man-made mass re-entering the atmosphere compare to what nature does without us having any interaction, the micrometeors and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we did look at that a little bit. Marty Ross does a lot of that research, and there is actually quite a huge range of what the estimate of the natural environment is. And at our higher levels, we're in that range. So we're going, if we have this much stuff coming back that's man-made, we're gonna be on par with the natural environment, but we don't yet know, are we gonna be larger than the natural environment, or are we still much smaller than the
Hey, Grant.
natural? Yes,
I talked to Asha about this, and you are correct when it comes to there's tons of iron that enters the atmosphere all the time. What's not there is aluminum. So you have to actually look at, what are those constituent elemental materials that are coming in? So aluminum is actually,
yeah,
not because most micrometeorite and dust are iron based and not aluminum.
right, yeah, so there is that constituent addition, and I understand Asha has taken a much deeper look at what that impact is from that aluminum in her dissertation that she's working on, or her thesis. Okay, thank you all. Enjoy lunch.